So my question is asking about media trust. So there's all kinds of studies out there. Gallup recently found that only 32% of Americans say that they trust the media, either very much or generally, to report the truth. Almost 40% say they do not trust the media at all, and the rest say they generally don't. There is also reporting from the Associated Press that said that nearly 3/4 of U.S. adults say the U.S. news media is increasing the political polarization in the country, and just under half say they have little to no trust in the media's ability to report the news fairly and accurately. And that's from a poll from the Associated Press. So given the media's lack of credibility with the majority of the country, do you think voters are actually going to be content or the content that these journalists are creating that Trump, because overall the media attacks Trump. And so is the media actually undermining democracy by putting out coverage that vast swaths of the populace perceive to be unfair or straight up false?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think you have to look at the macro and the micro picture. What I mean by that is the overall media. Yes, you're right, that in terms of public trust, 70% of the media was trusted by the public during Watergate. 50 years later, 30 some odd percent is. So that's true. But also that was back in the days when media was essentially the three networks and major newspapers. There wasn't even CNN. Not to mention, that didn't come out till 1981, not to mention all these political stations from MSNBC to Fox on down to even the more partisan ones. So I think that if you look at it from the micro picture and you say, okay, I think a lot of media, most people that aren't very partisan still do believe that if they read an article in the Wall Street Journal or they read an article, say, in the Washington Post, as long as it's not opinionated, that is basically the news. And they do believe that. And I think that even right-wing media will quote the New York Times and left-wing media will quote the Wall Street Journal. But I do think because things have gotten so partisan, and you have not just Fox News, but you have OAN, you have all these other stations that are inflaming things, and then you have a post-truth environment, which frankly was largely created by Donald Trump. And so all this stuff has put us in what I would call dangerously close, if we're not there already, to a post-fact environment. And that, to me, is the biggest worry of this whole thing, because if people can't agree on facts, how can you govern? And that's what you have right now on both sides. So I think it really is a problem. And I think the solution is that we have to try to be educated consumers, if you will, listen to both sides, and both sides, some of the stuff, what they say is true, and basically pick out the tidbits from the rubble. And that is not an easy task.
No, it's definitely not an easy task. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the issue that a lot of conservatives, because the disapproval is led by Republicans. They're the ones who are the most dissatisfied with the national media. And you mentioned the Washington Post. So, for example, their new slogan is "Democracy dies in darkness." And the word democracy is with the root of demos, which means people. And to me, if you have the people themselves telling organizations like the Washington Post, you don't speak for me, you are not fair, you're not objective, you are not representing me, then I would argue they're part of the problem. They are part of the darkness if you're not understanding the people who say you don't represent me. Just as one example, I noticed the news coverage, I'm not talking about the opinion, the news alert that the Washington Post went out about the coverage of the Florida Supreme Court, or was it US? Anyway, a Supreme Court decision around this abortion law in Florida. I think it was the state Supreme Court. And they allowed the 15-week abortion ban to remain in place. And the Washington Post described the law as harsh, and they described it as strict. And to me, that's a value judgment. You're calling a law harsh, but you're in the news division. How is that objective? That's an opinion. So that's just one little factoid. And in fact, for 2 years, I was the spokeswoman for a anti-media bias organization called Accuracy in Media. And all I would do is every morning I would come up with a fresh blog post about the latest reporting headline or story or framing or article that was supposed to be neutral, but was actually quite biased. And there's a lot of content from Media Research Center as well that proves the same thing.
Well, again, I think if you look at, say, if a newspaper says, oh, this is strict or this is harsh, that's one thing. I think a lot of people will glide past that. I certainly would. On the other hand, if they misstate the rule and say, well, this law came to be from a different way, or it's 30 weeks, it's not 15 weeks, or if there's actually misstatement of facts, then I think that is a more pressing issue. And I think, again, if you look at where the media is going, people have to parse it. And it started, the way I see it, MSNBC doesn't lie the way Fox News does, but they certainly give you the version of the story that they want you to hear. So it is definitely slanted journalism. But again, people watch these shows not to be disagreed with. They watch Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity because they want to have their views confirmed, not disputed. And this is where you have to, again, be an educated consumer, think about it, parse what's right, parse what's wrong. So I'm hoping that once we can move past the Trump era, which I hope will end on, at least officially, on November 5th of this year, that we'll start to have a little ease off on this, because I do think that there's pressure on the media to keep up with Trump. And it's always, how do you cover him, right? Do you take him seriously, but not literally, but not seriously? Do you respond to everything that's said on Truth Social, every comment he has? A lot of this is the Putin strategy of the fire hose of falsehoods. So you're just so overwhelmed that if you try to fact check it every time and you try to fact check every single thing he says, it's a hopeless exercise. And that's one of the reasons that he's been successful on that. And I give him credit for it in terms of achieving his goal, not for elevating the state of politics. So again, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move past this, and that people are going to, as they tune into the election, which they usually don't do until after Labor Day, that they will be a little more discerning about what they do and how they interpret the media.